All right, it is 10 o'clock and I think we should get started here. So welcome to Finding Our Voices Together, incorporating civics into environmental education at your library. And my name is Deborah Dutcher. I'm the Library Services Consultant at the New Hampshire State Library. And my co-presenter is Jeff. Jeff, if you'd like to unmute yourself for a second and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Jeff Beavers. I'm the Assistant Director at the Conway Public Library in New Hampshire.
Thank you. Okay. And if you all nice people would like to put where you're zooming in from in the chat, that'd be great. And I'm going to just dive right in. So we have plenty of time for all the material and time for you folks. Well, maybe I'm diving right in. Yeah, here we go. So I'm always about the why, and this is my why about environmental education. I'm from Northern New Hampshire, for those of you that don't know, and I remember winters where the snow would be as high as the electrical wires. And now we have winters where time to enjoy the winter sports is more and more limited. During the pandemic, bird watching became and still is one of my biggest hobbies. And I noticed that the eastern bluebirds that typically migrate to warmer climates were visiting my feeders all winter long. So we have a graph here on the right, the eastern bluebird population trends in New Hampshire. The green line is from the summer breeding bird survey, and the other two are from winter counts, the Christmas bird count in December and the winter bird survey in February. And as you can see, up until the 2000s, there was not a lot of eastern bluebirds being seen in New Hampshire during the winter. As now you see in 2020, we're seeing almost as many in the winter as we do in the summer. So about the same time as I was really getting into watching birds and becoming more concerned about my own backyard, I joined the New Hampshire Environmental Educators, and I started taking courses with the New Hampshire Fish and Game and the New Hampshire Audubon, and seeing how we can incorporate this into library programming. And there are some great resources on how climate is affecting New Hampshire wildlife, such as moose with ticks and trouts with warmer waters at the end of this presentation. And the slides, if they're not posted yet on that main page where you found the Zoom link, they will be shortly. So how can we interest today's youth in nature, especially since we're living in such a technological world? Is the same way that I became interested, by first getting them involved in their own backyards. So why does it make sense to have libraries be a connector to nature? Well, some of the essential underpinnings of environmental education mirror those of a public library. This would be equity and inclusion, the importance of where one lives, and lifelong learning. Libraries, as you know, are already a community hub. We have existing resources such as nature books. A lot of us circulate nature backpacks. We have outdoor gear such as snowshoes. Something we talked about in the first session, seed libraries. And we often provide lectures from local nature experts. And it really doesn't matter if your library is using the CSLP All Together Now Summer Reading Theme or iRead's Find Your Voice theme. Both are perfect for incorporating opportunities and skills that are needed to protect and improve our environment. Many of your libraries have participated or may be participating now in the Transforming Teen Services program. And when we conduct hands-on field investigations, and meaningful action related to real-world issues, youth become fully engaged as active learners, something that we refer to as the connected learning. So, what is environmental education? Let's do a chat storm. So, type what you think environmental education is, what your definition would be, in the chat box, but don't hit send yet. Okay, I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, do we have our reply in the chat? Let's hit send. Everybody hit send. Becoming aware of nature, developing awareness of one's environment, how to be a good steward, interconnectedness with life and what it means. Some great answers there. So this is the definition that was adopted in 1976 by the United Nations Conference. The goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of its associated problems and which has the knowledge, skills, attitudes, motivations, and commitment to work individually and collectively towards solutions of current problems and the prevention of new ones. So why is environmental education important? We have a need for environmentally literate citizens. We need to improve learning and stewardship, as some of you mentioned in the chat, create system thinkers, increase creativity, critical thinking, empathy, health, and more. Environmental education is a process that allows individuals to explore environmental issues, engage in problem solving, and take action to improve the environment. As a result, individuals develop a deeper understanding of environmental issues and have the skills to make informed and responsible decisions. Okay, so now what does it mean to be a citizen? We'll do another chat storm. So type what's your definition of what it means to be a citizen in the chat, but do not send it yet. All right, fingers on the send button and go. Participate, have a positive influence. Participating. I love that. Participating, yes. Oh, went too far there. So a citizen is a member of a community who has rights and responsibilities. Individuals really must have some knowledge, skills, and dispositions to be an effective citizen. And civic inquiry is the process of asking and developing questions, planning inquiries and investigations, analyzing data, communicating conclusions using evidence from the inquiry, and then proposing and taking action based on those conclusions. So here is my version of the Civic Science Inquiry to Action framework. And this framework focuses on investigations into local environmental issues, and it leads to informed action. Now, depending on your inquiry question, data collection may be required, or it may be as simple as studying policy and procedures or laws and regulations surrounding a topic. Collaboration is important and includes identification of all stakeholders in the issue. And in order to take action, sometimes funding options may be needed. And remember, action does not always mean your hands-on getting dirty. It can mean petitioning lawmakers on an issue. So here's a nice visual to identify the effects and root causes of what a concern is. As it states, root causes are the best thing to tackle for the most impact, thus creating sustainable change. By conducting hands-on field investigations and meaningful action related to real-world issues, we become involved as active and engaged learners. This approach can positively impact our interest in learning, and by engaging in problem-solving situations that place learning in the context of our daily lives, we ask ourselves to think critically, to solve problems, communicate effectively, and employ analytical skills and higher order thinking. These are skills that are essential to preparing a workforce that's ready for the innovation and challenges of the 21st century. So here are just a few of the issues that could be explored in your community. I recently visited Louisiana, and the average oak tree in the South can soak up to tens of thousands of gallons of water each year. And they're really exploring that fact as a way of reducing flood risk. Trees everywhere soak up greenhouse gases and they clean our air. They correlate with a drop in anxiety and depression. They give a home to wildlife. They give shade, they cool us down. Trees filter our water, making our drinking supply cleaner. I'm wondering, what is important to your community and environment? Do you have some burning issues in your communities? If you could maybe put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that while I move on to the next screen. So this was something that I recently read, and I thought it was quite interesting. You know, when we think of pollution, we think of seeing a bunch of plastic floating around in the ocean, or fast food wrappers blowing down the street. But pollution can come in many forms. And I recently, like as I said, read an article about light pollution. And it was came out of a university in Arizona. They noted that a child born today in a place where 250 stars are visible now would only be able to see 100 stars on their 18th birthday. All right, so the Lake Champlain watershed, dangerous algae in the lakes. Yeah, I'm finding that every summer we hear more and more about the algae. Affordable housing, alternative energy accessibility. Some great topics that need addressing in the chat. So this is what it can look like when libraries are in action. We're already, I'm sure, I know of all the wonderful libraries that there are in New England, all over the United States, but especially New England. You're lending the resources like I talked about before, book collections, backpacks, have seed libraries. I know that you're getting outside, and using the parks and green spaces. I don't know, it wasn't this last one, or the winter before, I actually did a webinar on outdoor winter story times that I know were happening all over the place. So we are using our space outside year round because we're New Englanders and we can handle it. We know how to put on a snowsuit. Nature clubs. And when you're offering all these programs, you're offering leadership to your communities. So I gave this particular site its own slide because I think it's a really great place to start if you're like, oh, what can I do? You know, SciStarter is a really wonderful website that they have training modules and they have a wonderful database of projects. And let's remember that this process of understanding an issue and taking action to address it, it really gives youth and adults a sense of agency to make change, building a foundation for a lifetime of environmental stewardship and civic responsibility. And here are a couple of days that are coming up in April that provide us all an opportunity to become involved. Whoop. Stop that. There, okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Jeff, who is going to talk about something that happened in his community the last couple of years.
Alrighty. Thanks, Deb. So Deb asked me to come and talk to you guys today about a citizen science experiment we've been doing at our library. This is our third summer now that we're going to be doing this. And it actually all started with the pandemic and the need to just find some programs that we could do outside with our kids instead of inside at the library. We also had a little bit of time that we were closed and I was looking for some professional development to do just to keep busy. And I came across these National Geographic Certified Educator courses. They're free to take online. It's just a module-based class that you work your way through kind of at your own pace. And the one I picked was on microplastics, which for those of you that don't know, microplastics are essentially what happens when plastics that can't biodegrade break down into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually they find their way into our water and our soil and our animals, and even at a certain point our air, once they're small enough and they can become airborne. So there are some learning objectives that were behind this course that are here on the screen. But the main thing that came out of it were two geo-inquiry questions, which I'll talk a little bit at the end about the geo-inquiry process with National Geographic. But these ended up being our driving questions the past couple summers that we put out to the kids and then had them kind of help us develop these experiments. So looking at what kind and quantity of plastic waste is in the community, as well as where that plastic waste is actually coming from. So next slide. All right. So our first summer we did this, we did a series of orientation sessions, and again, this was coming out of the pandemic, so it had to be small groups, like one family at a time, which actually worked out really nicely. We had the kids brainstorm the different things that we use plastics for. We had them then talk about how long they thought it would take that item, say a water bottle or a plastic bag, to completely degrade, why certain plastics could or couldn't be recycled, and all the negative effects that single-use plastic or plastic in our water supply causes. Then we did 3 different activities with the kids, just to kind of make sure they understood what it was they were looking at for the summer. The first one was looking at 2 different face washes under a microscope, which you can see that the 2 compared on the right side of the screen. I think it was in 2019, the US passed a law that banned using plastic microbeads in different cosmetics, whether it's a face wash or an exfoliant body scrub or something along those lines. And now all the companies have to use a cellulose or a plant sugar-based exfoliant. The top picture you see there, those are plastic microbeads. So for decades and decades, we just had these in our shampoo that we were washing down the drain. And now you can see the new one, it will actually completely dissolve once it's in water. We had these little, you can see on the bottom left, these little microscopes. They're actually fairly cheap to get. I think they were $30 or $40 off of Amazon, and they're digital. So they just plug into a laptop and display the picture on the screen, let you take pictures, let you record what you're doing. So we had the kids look at this to start. Then we did an experiment with just a regular sand table we had for sensory story time, where the kids built little sand castles in a river and a little mock town. And then we poked a bunch of holes in the bottom of a paper cup to simulate rain, filled it with water, and washed. We actually used scraps from our 3D printer. So it was really fine little bits of plastic that we could sprinkle in the sand so they could see how things would wash from, say, uphill to downhill and eventually collect in a river. And then the last thing we did was a bioaccumulation tag game. And bioaccumulation, if you're not familiar with the term, is essentially something that happens with pollution, in this case plastic, where the smallest organisms in a food chain will eat it. So macroinvertebrates, which is what we ended up studying heavily last summer, clams and shrimp and things like that will eat it, and then a fish will eat the clam, and then a bigger fish will eat that fish, and then a bird will eat it. And eventually that plastic or pollution builds up as it moves up the food chain, because each successively larger organism is going to eat more and more of the smaller organisms. And this was a pretty simple game that we just had a bunch of popsicle sticks that were painted several different colors, and each kid could carry 10 of them. And if they got tagged, they had to drop their popsicle sticks, but they didn't know which popsicle sticks were food and which were plastic, and they had to have the right amount of food after each round to survive and move on. So showing them that, like, an animal may think they're eating something that's food because it's a little bit of plastic covered in algae or something like that. So it smells and tastes and looks like food, but it's once it ends up in their stomach, they can't digest it, and enough of it builds up and it's really bad for that animal or for the whole ecosystem. Next slide. At the end of the summer, we had all the kids come back and we did an analysis session of what they found. We had a little field journal that they took out with them to record their observations. And we also used something called the Marine Debris Tracker app. And that's put out by NOAA and National Geographic. Anybody could download it onto their phone, and it actually would use the GPS in the phone to tag exactly where they were, and it reports the pollution they're finding to a worldwide database that's trying to keep track of things like plastic and stuff that shouldn't be in our water or in our watershed. In the middle there, you'll see the pollution that our kids recorded over the summer. And during these analysis sessions, we also compared, our idea was to do sort of a source to sea analysis of the Saco River. So we compared from 3 points: Saco Lake in Crawford Notch, which is the source, the Saco River in Conway, 10, 20 miles south of there. And then we had one group of teams that went all the way out to Biddeford, Maine, and collected water from where the Saco enters the Atlantic Ocean. Filtered that down, compared it under a microscope, and sort of looked at what the difference in pollution and water quality was as the river had more human interaction or more human waste going into it. Next slide. What we ultimately found, though, working with kids, was you couldn't really rely on some of the data that was coming back. We had some jars that sat in the car or the window of their house for the whole summer, and when we opened it up, it was pretty much the worst smell I've ever smelled. And it just kind of took away some of the scientific rigor that we were hoping for. So last summer, we looked for a way to kind of improve that, and partnered with Green Mountain Conservation Group, which is in just south of our library, as well as New Hampshire Fish and Game, to be part of their Volunteer Biological Assessment Program, or VBAP. And VBAP goes out, this time we did the Swift River, which also flows into Conway, but it looks at biological, physical, and chemical parameters of the river, and actually puts them in a metric that can be measured against other spots on other rivers to see how healthy it is. Go ahead and go to the next one. Okay. So to do a VBAP experiment, New Hampshire Fish and Game has a great guide that anybody can follow. It goes step by step on how you would do this. But you would pick a spot along the river, and we measured out 200 feet, marking the beginning, middle, and end. And then at each of those spots, we used a little chemical reader that New Hampshire Fish and Game provided, but you can also buy like a water test kit from PetSmart that you would use for an aquarium to get a lot of these measurements. And at each of those locations, we look at dissolved oxygen, so how much oxygen is in the river, which is an indication of how much life it can support, the pH, the temperature, and turbidity, which is basically the clarity of the water, how much debris is floating in it. Then we actually positioned, you can see somebody holding one of the nets in the middle picture, but there are these plankton nets that had a little bottle at the end of them, so they're a really fine mesh. And we positioned these in the river, stirred up the bottom, collected what we could in them, and then dumped them into these basically Tupperware trays and sorted out all the different macroinvertebrates we could find. So macro meaning big enough you can see it, and invertebrate meaning no backbone. So it's a lot of larvae and little critters like that you might find in a river. Go ahead to the next one. In the top left here, you can see one of those macroinvertebrates that is a caddisfly larva, which is always one of the kids' favorites because they will pick up anything that's around them and build that little shell that you see on its back. Otherwise, it looks kind of like a little slug. And we even have an example we always show with the kids where there was an artist in France that took these and put them in a tank full of like gold flecks and diamonds and rubies, and they built their little shell out of the precious metals, and then they used that to make jewelry. So on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is the VBAP procedure for how you get your water quality score. So it's looking at all of these different invertebrates, how many you find, and each one is given a tolerance value. The higher the number, the more pollution they can stand. So you just total up how many of each you found, you multiply it by their tolerance value, and then you just do a quick division to get your number. And in this case, somebody knows the caddisfly case for earrings from West Virginia. So there's somebody that's doing it here in the States too. That's really cool. So you can see here, this is one of our things, and our final score was 3.8, which puts us in good but not excellent quality water. Oh, and the thing on the left there, that pile of garbage, we did last winter, we did a found art program where kids could come in and use recycled materials to make their own art. And we had somebody from our summer come back and actually make a caddisfly larva that built its little shell out of chip bags and Yoo-hoo boxes and all this trash that they found, which I thought was pretty cool. Next slide, please. Okay. So after we did all of that in the field, we had the kids come back and actually calculate the biotic score and the water quality score back at the library versus trying to do it out in the field. And we also took back a water sample to look at the microplastics like we did the previous summer. So we filtered it down and looked at it under a microscope. What we had found the year before, though, was it was really hard to identify some of these small plastic particles and knowing what was a rock and what was plastic and what was, some organic piece of matter. So we also added something last summer called Nile Red, which is a selective fluorescent dye. It'll only work on polymers and lipids. Polymers are the plastic chains, and lipids would be like a fat if it was in the water. So you can get some false identification with like organic material, but there's not a lot of that in rivers. So mostly what you're seeing is the polymers. You put it under essentially a UV light, and on the bottom you see two pictures. They're both of the same sample. One of them is just under regular light under a microscope, and the other are the Those green glowy things are the plastic particles once the Nile red has attached to them. So we did this with the Swift River water, but we wanted to look at other sources as well. So we also took Poland Spring, which is a bottled water company that is located right across the border from Conway, and looked at that water, as well as simulated washing machine water, where we took a fleece and just dunked it in a fish tank over and over and over again, and then took that water and filtered it and took a look at it. To my surprise and all of the kids' surprise, there was a significant amount of microplastics in all of those. We kind of expected it from the washing machine water, but the river and especially the bottled water, I think everybody thought was going to be a lot cleaner than it was. And that was quite a surprise to know that even, filtered bottled water has a significant amount of microplastics in it. Next slide. So for anybody that's in New Hampshire, you can go to the next. Okay. Anybody that's in New Hampshire, you can actually get trained by New Hampshire Fish and Game through their Aquatic Resources Education Program to do VBAP. It was free for me to attend, and it was just a one-day workshop. They took you out to the river. They showed you all of the different ways to set stuff up and take the measurements. That little turtle you see is actually a baby snapping turtle we found during this training, which was really fun. And that's a lot of fun with the kids as well, because there are all sorts of little critters in the water that, especially the macroinvertebrates, that are things they've really never stopped and looked at that closely before. And they kind of look like these crazy little alien creatures that really fascinate the kids. So this upcoming year, we're going to be doing VBAP entirely in-house on our own. And we're also, you can go ahead to the next slide. We're also got a license from New Hampshire Fish and Game to do a warm water simulated river ecosystem in our library. So on the right, what you're seeing is the setup for the fish tank that essentially has a water pump on one end and would pump water through PVC pipe to the opposite side. So it will create a continuous flow in the fish tank similar to a river from one side to the other. And you do, for any type of wild fish or animal, you do have to have a license from New Hampshire Fish and Game to keep them in captivity. But what this allows libraries and classrooms to do is actually go out and collect fish over the summer, fish and macroinvertebrates, bring them back into the library and keep them in the tank for kids to come in and see in more of a kind of contained, supervised environment. The picture on the left there, that is Kayla. She's one of the watershed educators for the state of New Hampshire. And that Ghostbusters backpack thing is what she'll be bringing out this summer to use with the kids. There's like a little tail, you can see it go off her hip, and then the wand that she's sticking out in the water, and it shoots an electric pulse between the two of them. So it stuns any fish that are swimming in the water between, and they float up to the surface, and she just scoops them up in the little net. And about an hour later, they're just going to wake up in the fish tank in the library. And at the end of the summer, we put them back. Go ahead to the next slide. So this here is just a little model, a graphic of the geo inquiry process, which is what we started with and is kind of still driving our experiment. And the idea, which Deb kind of talked about, was taking a local problem, looking at the pollution just in our river here in Conway, and looking through it at a series of different lenses. The most obvious one is that it's an ecological lens. We're looking at it, is there pollution, is there not pollution? But we also ask kids to look at it from an economic perspective. Where is this pollution coming from? One of the things that was readily identified was the tubers that are often in our river, and seeing flip-flops and particles of bathing suits and garbage that was expected to come from them. So that does have a cultural and an economic lens to it. But then taking those things and going from your local problem to how could we solve it here? How could we solve it in the state, the region, or at a global level, looking at plastic pollution? So I think that's all I have to share. It's been a lot of fun to work on this with Deb, and I'm going to hand it back over.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This is really the fun stuff that I miss doing, not working in a public library. So I'm happy to see all this work that's going on. I have just a couple more slides to share, and then I'll stop sharing, and then we can open it up for questions and discussion. Okay, so the next two slides are just more or less some resources for you all. Like Jeff, I've worked with the New Hampshire Fish and Game. They've been great, and I tried to put in the different divisions for the different states here on this page, and I also worked a lot with the University of New Hampshire last year, especially their marine docent program, where it was oceans of possibilities for the summer reading that we did here in New Hampshire. It was really great. And they are offering more programs. So if you're in New Hampshire, you might want to contact the same people, the Marine Docent Program. And then the next page is what I referred to earlier as just a whole bunch of different references and resources for you to look at. And, you know, in the end, incorporating civic science into your library can be as simple as doing like what I do, that the bird counts. I count what different birds I see at my feeders or outside of my house at different times of the year. Or it could be a grander project like what Jeff just explained to you. But I hope that we've given you a lot of resources to explore so that you can maybe incorporate some civic or citizen science projects at your library. And I'm going to stop sharing. And now I would like to open it up to anybody that has questions for Jeff's project, or if you have something super that's going on at your library that you'd like to tell us about. I'm sure everybody would like to hear from you.
Jeff, it's so exciting. Sorry, I was going to
go ahead, Nicole.
Sorry, I didn't see somebody here there. Because I used to do this citizen monitoring when I was in Virginia. So as just a part-time library director, I haven't really figured out a lot to do at this level. So I'm imagining you have a lot of time more than I do, but I'm not sure. I would love to hear how you incorporate, how many programs you did, how much time. I know you started it during COVID, but how do you get to do all these things? How much time did you allocate towards it in a week, a month?
Well, so I'm actually from Virginia as well. That's pretty cool.
Oh, I thought,
moved up here a few years ago.
Cool.
But there's a decent amount of time you'll have to put in planning wise, and a lot of it's just in organization, making sure you know what you're going to do, you have all the supplies ready, you know what you're going to go out and talk to the kids about. Part of what let us do it the second year, going to Green Mountain and Fish and Game, that took a lot of pressure off of library staff to do the planning. So we more or less advertised the program, and then they sent their instructors to actually do the course. Now that I've seen that happen 3-4 times and I've gone through the training myself, I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to kind of just pick it up and do it without a whole lot of extra planning or work. The first summer was a lot, but a lot of that also was the pandemic. We had to do each orientation and analysis, I think 4 separate times to keep people in small enough groups. But since then, you know, like last year and this year, it'll just be one program where they come and go to the river, probably about 2 hours just to leave enough time to do everything, and then one probably hour-long program to do the analysis session.
You don't have a creek or a stream at your library, right? You have to go somewhere to do it, or do you have access right at the library?
So where we went on the Swift River is about a half a mile down the road from us, directly behind the middle school, and we just had everybody meet us at the middle school for that.
Yeah.
But we do have the Saco River is you know, maybe a quarter mile from the library, and we're going to try and do a separate spot because there are other school groups that use that same spot for VBAP as part of their school program. So we're
Right.
trying to look at a separate spot that is walking distance from the library so that we have 2 points of data on the river instead of just one.
Yeah, that's really cool. I actually have worked at Ferry Beach, which is at the end of Saco River. So that was another cool connection too. We do have a creek right on the property of the school we're at. So that might be a cool possibility. We also have a garden, since you asked Deborah what other like nature connection things. And we do have a trail that the school has, that the library has access to take, and it has some like activity things along the trail. So those are some of the things that we're already doing. And we do the story walk along that trail and bring them right next to the river. So I would love to do a story walk. Even what's that one? Trout Are Made of Trees is a great one that Liz, I think it's April Sayre wrote, and it's basically the leaf drops down in the water, the macro eats it, the fish eats the macro, and we eat the, you know, fish later. So we're made of trees too. So it's like this really cool like cycle of life story. But yeah, so that's, I'll tie that into your question, Deborah. But I'd love to talk to you, Jeff, later. I don't want to take all the time now, but I'm excited about this idea. So very cool.
Cool. I really think any body of water you have would work.
Yeah.
Part of it would just be knowing what it is, what animals it is you're looking for in that water, which is going to be different
right.
than say a stream up here.
Well, it's really cool with the plastics. There's a really great with Project Wet, everyone lives downstream activity that everybody could do in the library, where you have everybody got $1 million and a piece of property. What would you build on it? And then based on whatever they build, you give them a piece of trash that might be an impact based on the building that they do. And they're all lined up along a river that you've created. And as then you have a rainstorm and everybody passes whatever they have all the way down to the end. And so the last person at the end of the stream that you've created gets all of that trash. It's a really good visual. And I thought that would be a cool activity to do first, and then make your macro invertebrate out of the trash afterwards. So that would be really cool. That's where my mind is already going. So thank you.
Yeah, both Jeff and my email is at the very first page of our slides, so you can contact either Jeff or I after today. And Danielle has put in a link for a training in Rhode Island for you Rhode Island folks. Other questions? Great things happening.
This is more of a September event, but we have, in regards to environmental programming, we've been participating in Climate Prep Week, which is kind of part of communities responding to extreme weather in Massachusetts. And it's officially in the last week of September, but we kind of spread things out throughout September. And anyway, I'd be happy to share more information about that. More and more libraries, at least in Massachusetts, but I think nationwide, are starting to do this, because a lot of libraries are also agreeing to become climate hubs, or there's different levels of hubs that you can be. But anyway, I just wanted to share that it's for an environmental topic. It's there's a lot of things out there that you can, like ideas you can borrow and use, and I can share the link of CREW, which is, again, communities responding to extreme weather, which a lot of libraries are involved in. So we'll send that link.
Yes, any links in the chat is great. There's a question about the nature backpacks. So a few that I've seen, especially here in New Hampshire, there was a library that had like a backpack that pertained to the seacoast, and it had nature guides for different kinds of seashells and sea creatures that you might see. And then there was one for, they all had binoculars and magnifying glasses in them. And there was one for the mountains. It had maps. So you can have a general backpack just for outside, you know, with binoculars and nature guides, but you can really detail it to your region as well. So we still have a few minutes. The next session doesn't start until 11, so feel free to. Oh, garden backpacks to go with the seed library. Great idea.
We have Lori mini grants in Rhode Island, and I actually am proposed to buy 2 backpacks, one for birding and one for hiking, because my library sits on a cove, and a lot of outside groups uses that for birding, and there's hike trail paths that come through that section. So like you said, you can pretty much kind of personalize the backpacks to whatever you want around your library. So, for the birding one, it's the bird ID, the binoculars, excuse me, for kind of kids and adults if you wanted to, because we are thinking of putting it in the adult section, but sometimes we're also expecting, families to check it out. And you can put activity sheets in there for, because if kids are going with them, you want them to look for stuff to use. So you can put like a scavenger hunt, an outside scavenger hunt in there if you wanted to, and just eliminate it. Done. There's another quick little activity to go through it. And with hiking, it'll be like the hiking I'm in North Kingstown, so put hiking trails of North Kingstown. We have this little tiny paperback book that's like family hikes around your area, and it's to North Kingstown, goes out all the time. So we're just going to get another copy, put that in there. Last year for the camping theme, we looked up inclusive camping for like hiking rather for people who had mobility issues, and there was actually a lot. So we wanted to put that in there as well. So it was just like different fun things, and plant identifier, because that's a big hit. And then mushrooms, which may or may not be something you want to take a look at with The Last of Us, but just in case, know your enemy. So it's all these things you can really personalize your backpacks.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing.